Okay. Well, good morning. Thank you for returning for round two. I appreciate that that you've come back and put away some valuable time. After last session, I realised that I didn't sort of introduce myself at all. Really, I introduced the organisation and that, but maybe we're sort of past that now. But I have had a broad sort of governance experience. 10 years on the board of a super fund and as the mayor of a council as well as involved in lots of cooperatives. So hopefully what I bring to that is that sort of experience from public meetings with the community, hundreds of the community yelling at me, to you know, the sort of large corporate finance situation with heavy regulation, and then all the sort of the cooperative experience as well, but largely been based in Sydney. Don't know a lot about growing stuff, but can hopefully help on that broader side. We've got 4 topics today, which I did flag in the email, but the first thing I was going to do is to attempt to try and play a video just to sort of set the scene. So we've really done you know, Co-ops 101, the principles and values, and the national law in Australia, cooperatives national law. That was what we did last time. Today, we're really we're focusing on governance and on the director's role. So that's really largely about today. And then we'll go in, the last session will be some other aspects, meetings and financials and culture, things like that. But today's really focused on governance, and that's why the video is pertinent. Let me just try and pull it up. There we go. Great. All right. Now I'll just kick this off first to make sure that it runs for you, but you should be able to see a YouTube video. Is that visible?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, let's see if you can hear it.
You hear the word governance a lot these days, but what is it?
Can you hear that audio as well, gents?
Yep.
Yeah, I could hear that. Yep.
Great. All right. I'll just play the video. It's a big North American accent, but I think it's a good sort of scene setter for what we want to talk about today.
What does it really mean? And is it as important and serious as it sounds? Board governance or corporate governance simply refers to the job of a board of directors. Now, if you look at the position boards hold in corporations, you can see that they are sandwiched between shareholders or some kind of ownership on one side and the CEO and staff on the other side. Since the ultimate authority for the company or organization comes from the ownership, naturally, the governance job of the board comes down to 3 things.
I first just want to stress that what they're saying there, that situation, that is all you really are as the board. You are between the owners of the business and the business itself. And often, you know, boards can think that they're much more than that, but actually really your job is just to listen to the ownership, the members in a cooperative, and then get the co-op to do what the members want it to do. It's just a sort of construct I want to just stress up front.
Comes down to 3 things. 1, have ongoing dialogue with the ownership to discern their expectations for what results the organization should produce. 2, translate those expectations plus other information and the director's own perspectives and values into written criteria for success. And 3, check to see that those criteria were met. In a nutshell, that's it. Board members can do other things, like volunteer to help staff or get involved with fundraising or public relations, but the board's core governance role is ownership linkage, policy making, and monitoring policy compliance. Now, you can see why governance is so important. The job of the board is at the front end of what happens in organizations. Sometimes a really strong CEO can compensate somewhat for a weak board of directors, but for any organization to truly live up to its potential and achieve relevant results, good governance is critical. This is Susan Mogensen with Brown Dog Consulting. You hear the word governance a lot these days,
Stop.
but what?
Okay. So that's really, I just want to set the scene about governance, and it may be just common sense, or it may seem sort of, lightweight, but I think it's really important, and you can often, go off in tangents and go off in other places sitting on a board, but really it's about those three things: finding out what the members want, listening to the members, setting out a plan for the cooperative, and then making sure the plan happens. That's really it. As she says, you can get involved in other things, and there'll be other things like recruitment and other such roles, but really the key strategic focus of a board should be making sure you're doing what the members want, not doing things that the members don't want or are not interested in, and then setting out a plan, and then making sure that that plan happens. There isn't much more to governance well, there is, but that's really at the core of it. Does that sort of make sense to people? Reactions to?
All okay with me.
Yeah, it really is that. And sticking, particularly in a cooperative, obviously you've got you need to stay close to the members, find out what they want, continue constant engagement with members, and then you're not running the organization, you're just setting out a plan for it, setting out the policies, the frameworks of what you want it to do, and then you just make sure that it does that, or make sure that it does that eventually. Anyway, that's just a scene setter. And now we'll go into the slides, and I'll go back to the slides. That's the end. And you've got those now clearly?
Yeah. Yes. First one.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So again, I really encourage discussion, questions. It's boring to listen to me, for you and for me, and ask questions, and I'll come back to you if I don't know. And, I'm very happy to get into difficult subjects, and happy to we'll keep everything confidential at my end. These were the 4 topics. And the first is directors' roles and responsibilities, which is what we'll go into now, and we'll get down into the others, hopefully in the 2 hours. Any particular expectations this session? Any thoughts after last session that people would like me to focus on or like us to get to at this time? Now's your time, or?
No, I'm right. So far, so good. We're getting into how the board, how a co-op board works. Last time we were just explaining how the co-op board sits. It was sort of a skirting around the edges last session. This session we're sort of getting into it a bit more. Exactly,
that's the idea. Sort of, yeah. Okay.
I think a few of us have indicated subjects that we wanted, but it is like Malcolm said, it's good to get the teeth into it now. So happy with everything.
Look, it's true. I did add a couple of the topics to last session that weren't on your list, so I added them just because I think they're important to sort of refresher and set the scene. But we're certainly into the topics that you asked for. So that was my fault last time, but I just feel that sort of base work is important. All right, we'll keep going, and just come in with a question at any time. All right, so directors' roles and responsibilities. This is just again a bit of an opening, a scene setting, but members of any cooperative, they need a group to be responsible for the day-to-day running. For many of them, they're not interested in that sort of work. They're too busy. They want someone else. So the members need a group, a board, to be responsible for the day-to-day running. At the same time, the co-op needs a group that's committed to to the cooperative. It needs someone to look after it. It needs someone to make decisions for its benefit rather than always purely for member benefit. And so the co-op needs some sort of a group, focused on its survival. And then the board, the final point is that, initial point is just that board as a group is collectively responsible. It's not more Jim's fault because he's the chair, or someone else who has a particular focus, members of a committee or anything. It is collective responsibility. So you will fly together and you will sink together. It's not, you can't really blame others for that. It's a collective responsibility. So they're just sort of, again, just framing opening statements about members need a board, the co-op needs a board, and it's collectively collective responsibility.
Sam, I wonder why you haven't mentioned, that we are the voice from the members as well. So you get that information feed from members, which you kind of focus on more the responsibility of the board, but like we act for the voice from the members as well.
Absolutely. I think I think that's what I was trying to explain by you listen to the members and you get the organization to do what the members want. I see that as a voice, but it's more than that too. It's then you've got to run the organization as well, or govern the organization. But no, a voice is a good word, absolutely. Yeah, I see it as bigger than just a voice, if that makes sense, John.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we're just in those initial comments. So this is what it actually just says in the CNL, the Cooperatives National Law, about the director's role, and it's very simple like this. And you've got the references down on the bottom right for the CNL, but this is all it says about the board's role, really. The business of a cooperative is managed by the board of directors, and the board may exercise all powers that are not required to be exercised by a members' meeting. So that's a very broad remit, and it's basically the same as what you get in the Corporations Act for companies. So unless the rules or the law says that a decision must be made by members or in some other fashion, then the board can make a decision. So there are some limits in the law, and there are some limits in most rules of cooperatives. So like changing the rules, you need to go to members. Closing the co-op, you need to go to members. Selling large percentages of assets of the co-op, you need to go to members. There's a range of things that need to go to members, but otherwise the board can make decisions. So the board can sign contracts, it can purchase things, it has a very broad remit, unless it says somewhere that you can't make that decision. So some co-ops have quite restricted the board powers, particularly in their rules. They may not allow the board to accept members. They may not allow the board to make it, sort of major changes, or have a lot of decision making coming back to regular members meetings. But most co-ops have this quite broad remit, and it's important for you to know about. And the legislation is set up so you can have a cooperative with most decisions being able to be made by the board. Make sense?
Yeah.
So far? Okay. Now these are the sections in the Cooperatives National Law that talk about directors' duties. So these are what you'll be held against if things go pear-shaped. Particularly, this is what they'll be looking at. This is what the judge will be looking at in the court. Now, I've used directly the language from the CNL. I mean, so some of it is a bit sort of legalese and hard to decipher, but just wanted you to get it pure straight from the law as to what the duties are. So there's a list of duties in 192, and each has a sort of heading like this. This one's the care and diligence duty. And some of this now has come through in the CNL from the Corporations Act, you'll see, but other parts were there before. So that care and diligence a director must act with the degree of care and diligence that a reasonable person would exercise. So that's, if you're asleep at the wheel, you're not attending or participating in meetings, that's the question that they'll be that they'll be looking at, as to whether it's what a reasonable person would have done. That's the first one. The second one, and this has come through from the Corporations Act, and I think it's of interest, and it's good for directors to consider it, when they're looking at some of the tough decisions that you can have to make. You must make judgments in a good faith for a proper purpose. And the section in the brackets is, of course, different to the Corporations Act. So this is where the cooperative principles are expressed, taking into the cooperative principles where relevant. I'm not aware of a case being prosecuted on whether a board didn't take into account the cooperative principles yet, but the potential is there, and it sits in the law. You remember those 7 principles from our last session. Not have a material personal interest in the subject matter of the judgment, and we'll go into conflicts of interest later today. But this is how it's expressed in the CNL and how it's expressed in the director's duty. The third one I think is important: inform themselves about the subject matter or judgment to the extent they are reasonably believed to be appropriate. But I think it's an important one to stress. If you feel like you don't have enough information, or you don't have the right information, or the board is not ready to make that decision, then it's no trouble to hold up a decision and say, well, look, I think we need to investigate this. I need more information up to this before I feel I'm, properly informed to be able to make this decision. And the fourth one is that expression of having your co-op hat on when you're in the co-op boardroom. Believe the judgment is in the best interests of the cooperative. And that's again really important, and can be particularly difficult or grey areas when in a cooperative, because you're a member as well most of the time, and but you've got to be making decisions in the best interests of the cooperative, and that can sometimes not be in your own personal interest, or in your friends, or in your fellow members, or some of your members' interests. So that's how it's expressed, and that sort of put your co-op hat on when you're in the co-op boardroom. Making sense?
I think one of the really important things in the director's duties, it always has been for me, is to be fully informed. You've got to make sure that as a director, you go out and seek the information so that you're fully informed when you make a decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what the third point expresses in the business judgment rule. And it's great to hear, Jim. I totally agree. And I found that on the super board, sometimes proposals were presented to us because they were urgent. And we just didn't have enough information to make the right decision. And yeah, you've got to do work before the meetings, and try and get the information in time for the meeting so that you can make the decision. But if you're not comfortable and you don't believe you've got the information you need, then you should feel able to hold it up and to postpone it.
Ask questions.
Sorry?
Ask questions.
Ask questions. That's a slide coming down the session today. So you've full marks, Jim, for preempting one of my slides. All right, we'll just keep going through. It's 193 now. It's the good faith duty. So you must act in good faith at all times, best interest of the co-op for a proper purpose. You must not improper use of your position, not improperly use your position to gain advantage for yourself or for someone else, or cause detriment to the co-op. So this is how the law expresses this sort of behaviour and what you would be held to account against if things went to the court. And the final one is the use of information. So again, you'll get the slides, of course, so you no need to take notes, but you'll get all these slides. A person who obtains information because they are a director or were a director must not improperly use that information. So you can be held even after you've finished on a board. You can be held to account if you use information that you got when you were a director.
So Sam, when you say held to account, like if things, worst case scenario, and you don't abide by any number of those duties, what are some of the consequences for directors?
Yep, I didn't put them in here. We could actually have a look, but it's talking about fines. It's basically the same risks now that you face in the Corporations Act. So it's talking about fines, but it's also talking about jail time as well.
Yep.
And the fines can be large. We'll go on to talk about solvency, and that's another, another place where directors can come unstuck. But it's about money, and it's potentially about jail time now as well. Sometimes I run this program and then directors resign from the boards of their co-ops it has happened a couple of times. So hopefully that doesn't happen today, but some of this is about just the worst case scenario and putting the scaring directors a little bit. But I should have maybe said that up front. You're not looking worried, Jim. No, but no, it's certainly something to take serious. Look, a lot of these things, won't come out or, won't end up in the court, but you can see really the law is basically the same now as what you can see in the Corporations Act. And, there are occasional cases you can see where the regulators have taken directors to court and won, and there's some famous cases around in Australia where people have ended up in jail or with heavy fines.
In saying that, we can only deal with what's presented to us at board meetings. So if the wrong information is presented to us, you can prove that you haven't done anything untoward in the decisions you make.
The judge will be looking at whether you made we go back to this one, whether you questioned enough, whether you tested that information before you. And in the end, the buck stops with the board. So it's, yes, you would get into those arguments as to whether it was reasonable that you should have known the information was wrong, whether you tested it enough. But it's not just going to be as simple as saying, oh, the wrong information was put to us, so therefore it's the staff's fault. Yeah.
Well, I guess it'd be minuted at any questions you asked anyway, wouldn't it?
We'll definitely get on to minutes in the third session, and minutes are very important in these sort of discussions, absolutely. And we'll talk about the minute writing. I mean, minutes can be dry for lots of people, but certainly, well, we'll talk about it next time. But what I'll stress is that you need to put in the minutes what you think a judge would want to know, if it went that way. So you want to have that the board discussed, this aspect, considered this part, considered this, so that you can show if it went to court, so you can show that you did consider these matters. Someone asked a question, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely, while you don't want he said, she said in the minutes, you want a record of, that you considered these different aspects of the issue before you made the decision. So it's a good point, but yeah, you've got to be testing. Of course, sometimes you'll get the wrong information in front of you, and that will be part of the argument, but you've got to be testing that information. It's the same with the financials. When the board as a whole signs off on the financials every year, and you need to be testing that information as well, that you think it's it concurs with your understanding of the business. Okay. Grim faces I can see after this discussion. But it is.
I did one of these about 10 years or 8 years ago, and I do remember what was discussed. Oh,
you remember this? This reminds you of that session? Do you mean? Or?
Yeah, you've got to make decisions that don't have repercussions. You're accountable for what you do, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it is as I stressed last time. Members have limited liability, like shareholders do, but directors, it's a higher level of risk. If you're diligent, if you don't, you're careful, you do a reasonable job, you'll be fine. And there's insurance to assist for the board, etc. But if you're asleep at the wheel, if you are negligent, then there is some personal risk there becoming a director of a co-op or a company, or any organisation. All right. And then we move on to the cheery subject of insolvency. So this is also an issue clearly that should be on, up front for directors. As I say here, the penalties are significant. The framework now for cooperatives is basically the same as for companies. So the Corporations Act. There was a bit of a holiday on trading insolvent last year during COVID that also applied for cooperatives as well as corporations, as companies, but that finished the 31st of December, so it's now back and live. It's simply, while there's a lot of accounting debate about whether an entity is insolvent or solvent, the fundamental definition is that one is unable to pay its debts when they fall due. That's the section in the C&L that talks about it, but the process that you go through on that front is the same now as in the Corporations Act. We'll look at financials in the third session as well a bit, and we'll talk about ratios and looking at current assets and current liabilities and etc. So we'll talk a bit further about insolvency, but it's certainly something you need to keep an eye on, and hopefully get perhaps get regular information from the staff as to where you're tracking on solvency. Has that been an issue in the past, Jim?
Not really. We've made some decisions that have been a little bit slippery, but we've never been insolvent. We actually many years ago had one almost qualified report, but it wasn't, but it nearly was.
Okay. One of our member cooperatives last year went brought in the administrator just at the time when China sort of closed up, and they were in metal manufacturing, and China was a big competitor, but because of COVID, and it was much harder for people to get things in and out of China, 2 weeks after they brought the administrator in, because the board was worried about the solvency of the cooperative, they got millions of dollars worth of orders, and it was really quite tragic in the end, the timing, just that the directors were just too worried about insolvency, so they brought the administrator in. But if they'd waited 2 more weeks, the co-op would have turned around absolutely, because of COVID. So, and I was quite involved in that and watched it closely, and just, yeah, I mean, there are times when it can be worth taking some risks on that, to try and trade out of a situation. But the risks for the directors, I couldn't say to them, and we didn't know for sure that the orders were coming. I couldn't say to them, don't do it, because they were personally liable, and they were worried. And a couple of the directors were newly on the board and were guys working in the warehouse as a sort of workers cooperative. So they were just daunted by the potential exposure to themselves. So,
but what happened in that scenario? Did the administrator hand it back to them, the company back to him, much as, or
no?
Oh.
And it was, I think. Yeah, I don't think they brought in the right administrator, but no, it still had problems. The co-op still had financial issues even with the turnaround. No, the administrator eventually sold it to a private concern. Yeah. But once you bring the administrator in, they're the board. They're absolute control. So yeah,
they're the first one to get paid too.
And and he was paid a lot. I mean, they really, it's like often when you go to court, the lawyers are the only winners. Well, if you go into administration, often the administrator's the only. But yeah, his fees, I think, finished off any chance of it being turned around.
So Sam, where do we stand with our director's liability with our duty of care?
How do you mean? So,
well, do we stand like other company directors that laws can pursue company directors for their assets in relation to insolvency?
Yes, it's the same.
No cover from director's liability.
So
the insurance, I mean.
The insurance. No, the insurance largely covers for legal action against the co-op. So if you're, it really comes down. It'll come down to whether you were diligent and whether you were on the ball in your role. But no, the insurance doesn't really cover that, so you have to keep on top of solvency.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That's why they brought in the administrator.
Yes, that's right.
Mm.
Yeah. All right, cheery stuff, isn't it? Let's hope you never have to face it. And here's the slide that Jim preempted. It is really a lot about asking questions. And asking the right questions as the role of a director. Challenging information provided you that doesn't seem right, that you don't understand, and drilling down when you need that, when you need more information. And you have to test this information that's put to you. So it's what we were talking about before. It's not really enough to just say, well, the wrong information was put to us. You need to be testing it, and then showing that you've actually tested it as well in the record of the meeting. And minutes is a lot of what's discussed when these things go to court. And the minutes are the only records of the meetings, and what's in the minutes is really quite crucial. Okay. Yep.
I've got a question for you, Sam.
Yep.
And Jim. So in our situation where we have a cooperative and then we also have the cooperative and Manildra as part of a company above it, how does that affect the director's duties in just the cooperative if the company above becomes solvent? Insolvent. Yeah.
Well, I'll go first, but yeah, look, certainly the governance of the joint venture or whatever it's called now is down to the people on the board of that organisation. So the risks are less, I think, for the board of the cooperative now because largely the operations are being done through the other entity. So I'd be more worried if I was on the joint board or whatever. I've forgotten how you call that board, but I'd be more worried if you're on that board than sitting on the board of the co-op now. If does that make sense?
That's Sunshine Sugar.
Yes.
Board.
Yeah. Jim, do you want to?
I think the important thing is it gets back to gathering information and asking the questions. And before a decision is taken by the joint venture board, a major decision is taken by the joint venture board, the boards of both of the joint venture partners have discussed and have agreed to the course of action that's going to be taken. And I think that's the hinge point that, both of the boards, the cooperative board and the Manildra company, and then Manildra Harwood Sugars, the decisions are unanimous. Anybody hear me?
Yeah, no, I heard that. We could definitely look at, as I've said, I think that legally in the end, the responsibility is, for the joint venture is to the joint venture board. But I think the boards of the co-op and of Manildra could get caught up in something really poor if they was, they could be seen as part of it, but the risk is much more for sitting on the board of the joint venture.
But the joint venture is not a company, it's only a partnership. And so I suspect that actually flicks a little bit more responsibility back to the partnership boards as well, doesn't it?
Mm. So again, that's where I need to get a bit more understanding. When you say it's a partnership, it's still a legal entity, the joint venture, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's right. And it's still governed by corporate legislation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, the situation is that when we go to a board meeting, we basically get almost all the same information that the joint venture board gets anyway. So that's the way that the CEO is happy to run it. So we are fully informed. So that's and we can fully question as well. So that's fine.
Yeah.
It is a weakness we have at present with Zoom meetings, though. They're not really adequate for asking the questions you should be asking at a face-to-face board meeting. That is a concern at the moment.
Mm.
Yeah, and if we're only, if we have responsibility and duty, and things can come back on us, maybe there's an argument that 4 meetings a year isn't adequate for the members or directors on the cooperative board to gather enough information they need to make decisions. But yeah, it's probably a discussion for another day.
Is the joint venture board meeting more frequently? Is it monthly or something like that? Or no?
No, Sam. We generally have quarterly meetings, and the cooperative board meeting is held 1 week prior to the Sunshine Sugar board meeting.
Yeah, you did actually. You told me that last time. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, look, I think it's a good process. It's good that you have the meeting beforehand, and then you've got time. You've got another week to consider it. you know, between that and when the joint venture board is. So I think you have 2 looks at it, and I think that's got to be good for coming up with the right decisions at the end. Okay, it's a good discussion. This is just, I'll keep going so that we don't run out of time. This is just a reference to our manual, which I'll send you up some copies at the end of these sessions. Just a reference to where it talks about director's responsibility. Some of the other, no trouble. And just to emphasize that there is every co-op has a secretary responsible for the registration with fair trading, and there are certain responsibilities and certain penalties specific for secretaries. So is the CEO the secretary of the co-op, or who's the secretary?
No, Chief Financial Officer is.
Yeah, right. That's great. And so, yeah, they're responsible, you know, they're who fair trading will come to if there's any query. They'll ask the secretary. It's the secretary's responsibility that there are minutes taken, good minutes are taken. Registers, you know, share registers and everything sits in the secretary's name. In smaller co-ops, it's often someone on the board, and in larger co-ops, it's a dedicated position. So depends. But yeah, just so you know, there is about secretaries. Really, just a couple of other thoughts on directors' roles and responsibilities. I think there is some value in considering portfolios or areas of focus for directors. I know you've got the 3 regions, but it can actually be a good way to get more out of directors by actually having, you know, 1 or 2 focused on certain aspects. Could be on members, could be on finances, could be on projects, something like that. But it's often a way for people to be able to get their teeth more into areas where they've got skills or interest, and then the performance of the whole board together is improved. I don't know if you do any of that. Do you have committees of the co-op, or is it more at the joint venture level?
We used to have a committee system, but our board resolved to abandon that and go back to decisions all being taken at board level. Yeah,
and I can understand why that might have happened, given how the co-op's changed in the last few years. But yeah, that, you know, some co-ops will have someone who's a treasurer or something responsible because they may have those skills. It's just an idea that I want to put to you. Turnover is a director turnover is a big question in governance now. One that always has been, arguably. In superannuation, it's a 12-year maximum time you can spend on a superannuation fund board now. It's strict. Even if I actually spent 2 terms and I had a 1.5 year gap on the super fund I was at, but it didn't matter. It was 12 years total, and then you have to finish. But there's also nothing to say that someone who's been on a board 30 or 40 years might still be very much contributing, and, you know, just turnover for turnover's sake is not always the right decision as well. But having that, just thinking about that turnover, having new people come in, fresh ideas, avoiding sort of, unhealthy dominance or nepotism or worse, is healthy. And it's very much part of larger corporate governance now in Australia that, you know, fairly, as I said, in super, it's absolutely fixed by the regulator, and certainly most large companies now have pretty strict director turnover rules. I don't know. Do you have anything like that, Jim? You can directors can keep nominating. Yeah.
By and large, most of our board members are less than 10 years. 10 years would normally pull most of them up anyway. There'd be only probably 2 that'd be more than that.
Yeah. and that a mix is a good balance too. I don't sort of put forward any fixed ideas. I do think, I think making sure you are having some turnover is healthy, but there's lots of different situations and for co-ops and lots of different industries where it applies. Then the third concept is
this one before you go off it.
Yep.
I think succession. Are you going to talk about succession planning?
Yes, later on. Yeah.
Just as a matter of interest with our board, we had a vacancy on our board recently, and we only had one nomination. People are not as prepared to put their hand up and come forward for accepting the duties and responsibilities anymore.
Mm. It's not uncommon, and there's there is another time to talk about it, but we will we've now brought on to the board of the Federation 3 board observer positions, and so people can come to the meetings, be part of it and get a bit of a taste of it, some sort of like program like that where people can, a stepping stone towards coming on the board can be good. It can be a sign that, everyone's happy with how it's going, so they don't see any need to get involved. It can be a healthy sign. But you may need, maybe it's, I don't know, maybe you need to pay the directors more, Jim. Can be another angle to it.
I think one of the reasons I really want to see this training happen was so that more people could develop an understanding. So they might say, yes, I'm prepared to go ahead and offer myself. So if they know what their duties and responsibilities are, they might be more likely to come on board.
Yeah.
We actually have sort of, you could say, training systems as it is, because we've got harvesting cooperatives and we've got the cane growers organisation. So our members do actually usually sit on some of these other boards before they come up to the there. So we do have a training system. We did look at independent directors a few years ago, but the conclusion was they don't necessarily add any value. And so we've just kept it to within ourselves. But as Jim says, the lack of, I suppose, people with the interest and skills is not necessarily a very large pool. But we're still putting along.
Yeah. Independent directors is another another subject, and it's in the larger corporate end, it's very much in favour now. I'm of the view that a board needs to know when it needs expert advice and bring that in, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to put them on the board. You can just bring someone in when you need that certain expertise. Putting them on the board means they're part of all the decision making, and it's the facilities there in the co-op law, absolutely, and like CBH, the very big grain cooperative that we discussed last time, they have 9 grain farmers and 3 independents on the board, and certainly the previous chair spoke very well of the independents, that they'd added something to the board. But you'll have to pay them most likely, and they come with another perspective, and that's sometimes that can be healthy, sometimes that may be a source of division. But I'm very much of the view that you put people on the board when you actually need a director for all decisions, but you bring in expertise or advice. It's often talked about that every board needs a lawyer, an accountant, and etc. No, I don't sort of subscribe to that. Every organisation needs a lawyer and accountant, but whether you actually need them on the board is another question. Yeah. Sometimes it very much works. It lifts it sort of puts pressure on the other directors to and can offer a very fresh perspective. But other times it can be a little bit difficult to manage. And you have people who are sort of trying to develop a career as an independent director. That's a very different motivation to someone who's growing sugarcane and you know, trying to run their mill. That's a very different perspective. So yeah, you can see that I give lots of sitting on the fence answers to some of these issues, but hopefully that's you'll then make up your own minds. But this, I don't think it's always black and white. The third point I just want to stress is just this concept of policies. As that video talked about at the beginning, staying in touch with the members, finding out what they want, setting the framework, setting the policy, setting the plan for what the organisation does, and then monitoring it. Policy making really should be a big part of what any board does, not always dealing with, you know, individual matters and fine detailed stuff, but just setting strategies, frameworks, policies. I always think that when you make a difficult decision as a board, you should then look at whether you should be writing a policy so that you don't have to go through that again, and so that the, you know, the wisdom of that decision is captured and saved for the cooperative into the future, and everyone knows then it's agreed and it's open, that everyone knows that's the, you know, that's the policy and that's how things are done. It's terrible to have to keep going back and making the same decisions, you know, again. Just don't, make it once and then turn it into a policy. You'll need policies for compliance reasons, of course, but it's about building up that wisdom, building up that knowledge, that corporate knowledge. I was working with a housing cooperative recently, and we were talking about a policy about managing conflicts, and some of the members said, "Oh, we made that. You know, we made a policy about that 10 years ago." And I said, "Well, where is it?" And they had no idea where it was. And that, you know, that's just energy zapping and torture for everybody. I think when you go through that, you want to make sure you're capturing that knowledge. Making sense?
Yep.
Okay. Some of this is just me getting on a pedestal and having a rave, I think. Have you got, is there a policy that you can think of that the co-op has already or that you've used in recent times? Do you have policies about, is there one that comes straight to mind?
A number of them. Environment, workplace safety.
Yeah.
Lots and lots.
Yeah. Do you have a review process, like a regular review process, where they're reviewed over?
Plan.
Right.
Continuing improvement too, Jim. That's another one.
Yeah, continuous improvement.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think, I worked in an organisation a long time ago where the manager just wanted everything to be structured in a policy and have everyone agree to it. And then it just made her life much easier because she didn't have to make ad hoc decisions. She could say, well, we've got a policy for that. We all agreed on it. It is a very sort of practical way to proceed. We're at 10 o'clock. We've only done one of the modules. That's a little bit alarming for me. But I might just call the 5-minute break and bring you back at 10:05. Is that all right?
Yep.
Yep. So quick comfort break, smoko, and please be back right on 10:05. And I'll go back to the slides. Okay. You can see the slides again?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. All right, so that was directors' duties and responsibilities. There's a lot more to talk about there, but that sort of grounding information. This next module is about getting on the front foot. What are good principles, good ways to operate for good governance and conduct. So whereas the last module was really about, you know, the legal bottom line, this is about you know, some ideas for good governance in your role as a director of a co-op. This is another definition of what governance is: the processes, activities and relationships that ensure your co-op's effectively and properly run. I think it's quite a good way of expressing what governance is. But what I'm going to take you through here is from the Institute of Company Directors. It's a document that I recommend you have a look at, but it is more than 100 pages. They redid it in 2019. I'm a member, so maybe it's okay that we use it. It's a not-for-profit governance principles document, but don't worry about for-profit, not-for-profit. I think it's just got some very good ideas and concepts about what is good governance. And so I think it's worth us cracking through them. It's their thoughts, and it comes from a company perspective. So, you know, it's not specifically for co-ops, but I think the concepts of good governance are, you know, are the same, and there's a lot of good ideas in there for what is a, you know, what's a good way to be, you know, what's a good way to behave, things to do in a role in governing an organisation. Okay. Yep, you're still there and awake. The first one they stress is purpose and strategy. And I've already really banged on about this, saying that find out what the members want, set out a plan, and then make sure it happens. And that's the one that they stress, that you've got a clear purpose and strategy that aligns its activities to its purpose. You know what the co-op's there to do. You know what the members want it to do, and that's all clear and understood. It's open, it's upfront, it's on display. The board approves that strategy. Decisions by the board further that strategy. The board regularly devotes time to strategy and reviews it. It's really, really, sitting on a board should be more about strategy as much as you can, and less about, you know, day-to-day management. It should be about looking above the trees, seeing what's coming down the road, thinking about where you want to take the organisation. I think that's an important thing to stress, but it also needs to be clear for everyone what the co-op is doing, what it's not doing, what it's about. When you have that purpose and clear purpose and strategy, then a lot of other issues will fall away. So that's the first sort of principle that they stress, and I'd like to stress to you. Make sense so far? Sometimes you'll get dragged down into, you know, away from strategy, of course, but really that's, you know, that's the board's, the best place for the board to be. When things are going well, that's where you should be. The second one that they stress, and I agree, is roles and responsibilities. It's when those, when there's confusion about what people's roles are, what the board's role is, what the management's role is, when that's unclear, then you can get, people have, you know, the wrong expectation. That's when you can get into trouble. Directors understand their duties, their roles are clear, delegations are reviewed, and that mix between board and management, you know, that divide between board and management is clear. I suspect that's pretty clear for you in your co-op now, given that you've got the separate entity running things, but I don't know, just clarity about and understanding what your role is also good governance. I'll keep going because we're going to, otherwise we will run out of time. The third one is board composition, and I'm sure that's not how your board looks like, but that they stress, diversity, on board diversity, and it is absolutely out there in the, and that can be difficult in some industries, but it's absolutely out there in in corporate governance world now. Is there that you will make better decisions with the broader diversity of perspectives, of backgrounds, of gender, etc., etc. You will make better decisions with a diverse board, but you'll also, you need to be there. You need to be contributing. You need to not just be there because it's, because it's what's done or what you've always done. You need to be there because you're going to make a contribution. They stress, as we've talked about earlier, they stress limited tenure to encourage renewal, but staggered to retain corporate knowledge. They stress the board assessing skills and experience and disclosing that, so making it known what the skills and experience are of the board. A mix of personal attributes, which is that diversity point, and succession planning, which Jim has already mentioned today, and looking at the skills that you need. On the superannuation fund board I was on, we had a skills matrix where we identified all our skills and looked at the gaps that we had on the board. Do we need someone who knows more about IT or about HR or about finance, whatever. Having that sense of getting the mix right, and as I said before, it's collective responsibility. So getting that mix right can only strengthen your decision making. I think collective decision making is a real strength. You make better decisions together with all the perspectives there. But yeah, I don't know if there's I mean, that can be one reason to have independent directors, is really just to get a bit more diversity on the board. If you can't get it through your membership, and that can be a challenge for some co-ops. What do you think about that, gents? How's your diversity going? There are some younger men on this call, on this Zoom, but
we look younger than our age.
When we did that independent thing, the conclusion also was to bring in outside expertise as required. Yeah. I mean, but otherwise, I don't know whether our diversity. We don't have any women on the board.
Are there many women cane farmers, or?
There's a lot of wives. There's actually quite a few of the wives have got skills. Actually, cane growers have grabbed a legal lady who's the wife of a cane grower down here, using her to help them. And Vivian is actually the wife of a cane grower. So yeah, so there are some wives around who could be, but we haven't gone down that route yet.
Sam, have any of the cooperatives in New South Wales adopted a director selection process? So that directors are put forward to members for election?
Yes, so some do have a sort of a nominations committee, if you like, that sort of process where a small committee of the board sort of assesses directors' skills and suitability and then recommends them. So one that comes to mind is Hastings Co-op at Wallhope down near Port Macquarie. So they have that process in their rules, and in the end they need to be elected. That's you can't really get out of that in a co-op, but they do have a nominations process that happens before that. Yeah, I can share that with you if you want to have a look at how it works. They've got a policy, but in their rules, there's a section of their rules that talks about it in the director election process. Yeah, and I'm sure some of the other larger ones have similar things. Some have, some have requirements that directors have to have done this, you know, some sort of governance training, or even to have done the company directors 6-day course, you know, have completed that before you can nominate. And certainly that that the idea that you come on the board and then, you know, get the skills and training that you need. Certainly at the bigger end of town, you're supposed to have those skills and experience when you go on the board, not get them on, you know, not get them later. So there is that. That's certainly the sort of way that they were talking in superannuation, for example, not that you just go on and then get up to speed. You have to be up to speed before you go on. Are you thinking about that, you know, some sort of process, Jim, for your co-op?
Oh, no, not at all. But that's one way you can develop a different
yes,
variety of skills on the board. If you can,
yes,
if you can do that, you can improve the skills layout of your directors.
yes. What we would do whenever we had a vacancy on the super fund board is we would look back at that skills matrix and then go looking for people that would, you know, fill the gaps. So the board would say, look, we haven't got enough knowledge on cyber or on, you know, investments or on risk or something, and then we would actually go out to the people who are appointed onto the board and say, this is what we need. Can you please try and find us someone like that? It didn't always work. We didn't always get what we wanted, but we made clear what we felt we needed to improve the board. And that, you know, that could certainly be part of your renewal process or your recruitment process.
I mean, essentially, we do much the same thing, but in an informal process. I mean, both Nathan and I, when the member, the board member who retired left, I mean, the person who retired plus some of the others on the board sort of approached us and suggested that we apply. So there was a bit of skill seeking in that way. Yeah.
It is. I mean, I've seen the dynamic. I've seen the dynamic improve and change with women coming on the board, but in other, you know, to have you know, to have a board sit around who, you know, and talk about, you know, social media and apps, and none of the board really using social media and apps is just sort of, you know, like, yeah, it does. Those different perspectives, you know, can really add to your decision making. I mean, even I guess the situation for younger farmers compared to, you know, I don't know, but I think it is a good thing to talk about and keep in mind when you're looking at renewing. All right, keep going. Board effectiveness. So it can get a little bit silly because, you know, you are really reviewing yourself, but I think it's an important thing to stress. You know, people shouldn't be there if they're not contributing. There should be an open discussion about how are we going? Is the board as a whole contributing? But have that sort of, you know, that sort of discussion about, are you, you know, how is it going? And sometimes the chair can be a lead for that. Perhaps have a once a year discussion with every director, just how they think it's going, what more education they could need, and what more support. But just having that frank discussion about, are we actually, you know, are we contributing? Are the meetings going well? Are the directors asking for more information, contributing, turning up, you know, speaking in the meetings, etc. And how is the dynamic with management as well? But just having, I think it's a good principle to talk about, and sometimes, you know, it's never talked about. People just, you know, they're not thinking about board performance, but you should think about it. All right.
The boards, is it very often that boards meet independent of the CEO and the financial controller, and that sort of reviewing how the board's going that way?
Yep. I'll certainly will talk about that later in on the next session, that idea of and I think that's more and more now in governance, sort of what, you know, an in-camera session at the beginning of every board meeting where you actually can have a bit of a frank discussion amongst yourselves without any of the staff there. Ask those questions, ask a question or two that you might feel embarrassed to, or, you know, what you think is a silly question. There's no silly questions. But those sort of discussions I think are good. And in the end, you're collectively responsible as a group. So you should be able to have that sort of discussion. And sometimes management will be worried about those sort of meetings, you know, oh, what are they talking about? Are they talking about me? But I've seen it be a really, you know, a productive, productive thing. And yeah, no, it's definitely, that can be healthy in my view. But yeah, it might be a chance where you have that discussion about effectiveness as well. Okay. Risk, which we're going to hopefully talk about a bit later today. But 30 years ago, no one talked about risks. Now it's a whole industry. You know, the super fund had 3 staff who were just focused on risk the whole time. And if you haven't got a framework for risk in the co-op, or the joint venture doesn't, well, I suspect it does, but that thinking about risk in your decision making and in your strategic planning is, I think, is really important. Have you got all the eggs in one basket? Have you? What are the risks coming down? Is it government? You know, is it legislation? Is it regulation? Is it climate change? Is it whatever? Is it water? Is it disease, pests? I don't know. But having keeping those risk at the forefront, and also learning from when things happen, when pandemics happen, when whatever happens, you're ready the next time. You've put in place a plan to mitigate those risks into the future. How's risk in the joint venture, Jim? Is there a risk management framework?
Oh yeah. You just mentioned COVID. We've got a business continuity program to manage the pandemic. If something happens and one of our staff gets COVID, now there's all these things. Yeah. I believe we do our risk management fairly well, and we've also diversified, and we are diversifying. So we've addressed the risks. Yeah.
Okay, that's great.
One of the risks we have that's popping up now is overseas hacking on your computer systems.
Yes.
That's becoming a big risk.
The co-op that I mentioned, the metal manufacturing that went into administration, they had a ransomware attack in that period as well. It was just terrible. Sort of, it was all happening at once. But yeah, they lost control of their whole computer system for a week or two. In the end, they didn't pay the money, but yeah, it's more and more something to be aware of. And cyber risk, as they talk about it, is you can get insurance for it now. I'm not sure it's a great product yet. It's quite expensive, but it's definitely one of those things to look out for. All right, but we've got a bit more of a section on risk, so we'll talk about it then. So performance of the organisation, this is the 6th principle they talk about. What's good governance, what you should focus on. Again, that's like that third part of find out what the members want, set out the plan, monitor the performance, monitor that it's actually doing, the organisation's doing what you want. There's budgeting, there's reviews of the strategy. You've also got a role in reviewing the CEO, or the joint venture does, monitoring solvency, etc. Who chairs the joint venture, Jim? Does someone from the co-op or Manildra, or how does
we take it in turns, okay. 2 years about.
Right. And then does that person have a role with the CEO, sort of a more day-to-day role?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And does the CEO have KPIs and that sort of performance management structure?
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
They're fairly broad, but they are in place.
Yeah. Good. All right. So that's performance. I'll keep going. So we get close to time. So these are all principles of good governance. Just reminding you, this is stuff on the front foot. Transparency and accountability. Providing information not just to members but to stakeholders, the broader the stakeholders. They can get the documents and the policies of the co-op. A lot of the time it can just be you just have to be able to say that it's open. You know, people will grumble, but you say, oh, well, you got that information. You know, you want to give it to them so that when they grumble, you can say, well, you've actually already got that. It's really about front foot stuff. Any remuneration is clear. Members have the opportunity to ask questions. In a co-op, they must be able to ask questions at the AGM at least. That's in the law. Disclosure of transactions between parties, those sort of things. But that transparency and accountability, I think, is really important, and particularly in a co-op. It's very easy to go down a path where members feel that the board's, you know, keeping information or, not being open, and you can easily get disgruntled members that way. Okay.
We're talking here about communication at annual general meetings.
Definitely at the annual general meeting, but throughout the year as well. Yeah.
So in communicating with members, with newsletters and that sort of thing.
Yes. Really, the number one reason that cooperatives fall over is member communication and education. Absolutely. If you look across, it's when members no longer know what benefit the co-op's giving them, no longer understand how it works, and what the purpose of the co-op is, and that's when you'll, head down. You can head down. That's the most common reason that co-ops will head down the path of, demutualizing or closing or whatever. It's definitely the number one thing, and making sure that there's good ways. Communications for me is about lots of different ways to do it. Some people like emails, some people want meetings and a sausage, some people social media, etc. But having a diversity of ways that you communicate with members is really important, and being open and transparent. Okay. Yep. This one's really stressing the broader stakeholders, so not just members. So the other players in your industry, your customers, the local councils, whatever, the government, all those sort of broader stakeholders that can impact your organisation and that are connected to it. Is to take it further. Take it further than that. It's even talking about protecting vulnerable people. Complaints process. How is that dealt with? Is the board seeing what complaints come in, if any? All that sort of wrapped up in stakeholder engagement. All right.
About employees, Dan?
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, you've got to be obviously careful. You employ the CEO, and the CEO generally employs the staff, and you should leave most things to them. But employees should still be able to contact you, and you just have to handle that carefully. But there needs to be a way for the board to get information from employees at some point as well. It doesn't mean the board should be dabbling day to day or at all in management, but if sometimes you certainly need policies and structures around that. So, but for example, if an employee thinks that there's something up with the CEO, well, they can't go to the CEO, so they might need to come to the board. and you need to be open to those channels, but handle them very carefully. But I also, yeah, certainly on the super board, the CEO would never, he was the only one that came to meetings and wouldn't bring in other senior staff. And I found that to be a problem. And I felt like it was, you know, it was it wasn't the best way for us to operate. I felt like the next level down, he had 4 managers underneath him, should be coming to meetings as well. So they understand the board, they understand the members' perspective, they hear the members more directly, and they, you know, it's just a better, deeper engagement between management and board. But I don't know if that's what you were meaning, Jim, if you're thinking about disgruntled employees, or you're thinking about, you know, whether who comes to your board meetings, but both. Yeah.
I was thinking more of the stakeholder engagement and you know, how that can be improved.
And so including employees. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Look, I think it's got to be careful. I mean, I've been an employee in an organisation where I didn't want to have anything to do with the directors. You know, that was sort of way out of my league, you know, and I would have found that difficult to manage as an employee if I was, you know, having lots of engagement with the director. But it's also important for them to connect with who the owners and what the purpose of the organisation is, and that's seen through the board. So I think, is there a Christmas parties? Do the board go to that? Is there sort of, you know, informal ways that you engage with staff, or nothing like that?
No, we don't. The business contributes to Christmas parties and end of season parties and that sort of thing, but
yeah,
there's no engagement with board members and staff and employees. There's engagement.
Oh, we used to be invited. Well, when we had them, we used to be invited, but whether they come and chat to us or not, we do sort of have informal chats to various staff, but generally most of the employee communication is done through the organisation, not necessarily from the directors as such.
Yeah. It's something to be careful about, but it's really, if you I mean, I was just reading something on the weekend where, you know, they were saying, the directors were saying they didn't want to get all their information about the organisation through senior management. You know, they needed some other channels to see about the culture, see how healthy it was. And you've got to be careful. I mean, on the council I was on, we had one councillor who was just trying to direct staff to, you know, clean up things all the time. And, you know, eventually the CEO just said, look, I want all your communications coming through me, because you're just inappropriate in the way you're communicating with the council staff. And so you've got to be careful as a director in how you do that. And you know, yeah, but I think it's valuable as well. And I don't think I think you should have some, you know, you should have some connection with the organisation and with the staff.
We've been invited to Christmas parties, but COVID's knocked that on the head things aren't normal at the moment.
Absolutely. The world has changed.
We all live in relatively small towns, so most of us do tend to know a few people who work in the mills, just, you know, privately anyway. So you do pick up information that way, and you do chat about things. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm just saying I don't think that's bad. Just got to be, you know, careful with how you approach that. But I think that's a good thing, actually. Yeah. As long as you manage it well. All right, keep going. So conduct and compliance, the 9th one of the 10, we're nearly there. What's the expectation of behaviour? Board has a role in conduct and dealing with misconduct. The board has to should be setting an example too, and leading in this area. Conflicts are well managed, and there's processes for when you know, when there's poor behaviour or inappropriate conduct. Have you had issues with that in recent years? Crazy directors or or poor problems with staff, but it's something you need to be on top of and something you may need to deal with. And this is when you're not in the strategic role, you're in a hands-on role, and also that view of setting an example. Your conduct has to be as exemplary as it can be, and that can really set a tone for the whole organization. Okay. And the last one is culture, which we will talk about next time as well in the broader. But again, there's a whole industry around culture now. It's like the flavor of the last 5 years in corporate governance. There's people who measure culture now. I'm not fully convinced about it, but culture being how we do things. And, there certainly the culture industry talks about that it takes time to build up a good culture, but you can quite quickly destroy a good culture. And this can be where you want to interact, in other ways with the organisation. Do you have values that are out there and promoted? I guess for now, let's just say it's a concept of culture, and it's very much it's very much the forefront of corporate governance discussions at the moment. Do you think the culture's good in the mills or not, or average? What's the?
And I'll throw one in. I think we're responsible for culture within the board and the way the board operates. What real input can the board have into culture in the workplace, considering all the workplace laws, the regulations, all those sorts of things that are in place? What more can the board do apart from just control the culture of the board?
It is. And I think we got it in the strategic plan. There's sort of some comment about culture in there, and then it's from there that management are trying to improve culture further down the chain, which is management very much understands that is important, and they're doing quite a good job at trying to get that right.
The first thing I'd say is I think it's a bit. Obviously with the joint venture, it's a bit more remote for the co-op board. There's a sort of extra layer. You can certainly stress. Look, a large part of it, I think, should be on the CEO and senior management. But first thing I'd say is if staff in the organisation see how you conduct yourselves, can really set the tone. But just asking the CEO, what do you think is our culture? How are we, do people go the extra mile? Do they do things properly? Is there a really good ethic in the organisation? Ask the CEO about it as a start. But it's certainly, I'm sure you all know what it's like to be involved in an organisation with good culture, where there's, energy and good ethics. It's a great place to be involved with. And when the culture isn't like that, you see other people doing the wrong thing, then it can be very dispiriting and not very productive to be in an organisation like that. It's a bit of an ephemeral concept, but I'm sure you know what good culture is, and that's it can be a powerful force, I think, is what this latest movement in corporate governance is saying. But I understand your point, Jim, of course. You want a good culture on the board and a good culture in your decisions, but you also, you do have an influence on that organisation, and you can. Okay. Good. All right. So that is the magic 10. You'll get, as I said back here, there's a link in the slides that there's a link there where you can get to this document. I think there's lots of ideas for you in what you're doing as directors and what you can do, and I think it's I definitely recommend the document to you. Look, we've only got about 15 minutes, and so I think we're only going to get through 3 today, but that's okay. We'll have a bumper third session and rip through the others. But I do think it's worth getting on to conflicts now and having some work on that. This is what it says in the CNL about conflicts, and you'll note that this is again, I've given you the pure law, so it's a very, very long sentence, that first sentence, but in summary it means as soon as you've got an interest in something that the co-op's dealing with, or as soon as you come on the board, if you already have that interest, you need to declare it, and that's really the first step in any conflict management process. When you don't declare it, that's when you're going to have problems, and this is what the law says you must do. So you can get into trouble just for not declaring it, but it will certainly expose your fellow directors to risk if you haven't declared it, if they don't know about it. Sitting on the superannuation fund board, we had a list of all our interests at the front of the papers for every board meeting. So I knew what properties the other directors owned. I knew what banks they had their mortgage with. I knew, et cetera, really quite a lot of detail about their financial information. But that was because we were in the finance sector and, we were making decisions about investments, et cetera. So, but we actually had a register of interests that was maintained. We were asked every meeting, is there any changes do you need? But it was very upfront so that people knew what your potential conflicts were. The second part of what it says in the law is important too. If a director makes such a declaration, unless the board decides otherwise, they must not be present for any part of the discussion or the decision. So the board can say, yes, we think it's okay, Johnny, for you to stay in. We don't think it's a material conflict or a significant conflict, so you could stay in. But only the board really makes that decision, and the default position is that they shouldn't be in the room when there's a conflict. Does that make sense so far?
Yes.
Yep. Obviously, in co-ops, I think particularly it can be, conflicts can be an issue because you're all members as well. You're all, you're all.
I mean, don't we all have a contract? As part of the reason why the co-op exists, we have a contract to supply cane to the mill, which I suppose because we all are doing that, that then becomes null and void in this area. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's when but if you're making, say, if you're making decisions about, I don't know if you ever make decisions about the regions or something, that's when you start going down the path of them being material conflicts. Yes, if you're making decisions broadly, about every member, then, that's less likely to be a clear conflict, or that's, quite unlikely. But if you start to making specific decisions about certain types of members and you are one of those members, then that can be a conflict. There's no, again, I'm gonna, profess that there's quite a lot of grey. There's not a lot of black and white in conflicts. The other thing I'll stress is that it can be very much about perceptions. And even if there isn't really a material conflict of interest, if there's likely to be a perception that there was, that you should think seriously about that sort of decision as well. I've got one example that from one of our member co-ops. It's a sort of rural supplies, nursery, fuel sort of, so it was originally a dairy co-op, as sort of transformed into this sort of rural supplies type co-op. they wanted to buy a piece of land that was next to the co-op to expand the fuel sort of facility, and but the land was owned by one of the directors. And so the director was on the board, so they had that conflict. They considered it. They couldn't buy the land from any other director. It was that piece of land that they wanted. And in the end, they felt that that was a conflict they could manage. Yes, there were potential perception issues. You come on the board and you can sell land to the co-op. They got an independent valuation. They paid that sort of price. There was no sort of inflated price, and they chose to manage that conflict, and they bought the land. And I think that's a pretty reasonable, reasonable approach to take. That director wasn't in the room for any of the discussions, of course, and they managed that clearly. But the second conflict that they had at the same time was that they were looking at a software package, quite a niche one, where there was only really 3 providers in Australia. And one of them was another director of the co-op, and he'd recently come on the board as well. And so they got 3 tenders from the 3 providers, the only 3 that provide this software in Australia, and one of them was a director of the co-op. Now that's, for me, that's a much more challenging one. But the question is, what do you do? Say that the director's, tender is the cheapest, the best quality, say it's the best offering. Can you manage that? Can you manage that conflict? He's newly onto the board. There's much more of a flavour that potentially came on the board with the idea of this deal. Is there a way to manage it? In the end, they said, look, we're just not, we're not going to consider, we can't consider that his tender, even though it might have been the best option for the co-op. They just decided that they couldn't manage that conflict. So it can be about, how many other options there are. At the other end of the spectrum, you have got the land, where there was only one piece of land. Then you've got the software. Then you could look at, say, bookkeeping for the cooperative. Dozens and dozens of bookkeepers around. But if the bookkeeper was the brother of a director, can you find another bookkeeper? Is it easy to manage the conflict by ruling that sort of conflict out? Yes, I think it is easy if there's lots of other choices. If there's only one choice, maybe it's a conflict you have to manage to be able to do what's best for the co-op. If you've got 3 options, one of them's a conflicted one. Yeah. Anyway, that's a sort of beginning of examples. Have you got examples from your co-op around conflicts?
We have had issues in the past with on issues of pecuniary interest, and the person has come forward and said that, and he's absconded from voting on it. So it is an issue, but it's a real issue you see on a lot of boards, for sure.
Absolutely. Any examples you recall, Jim, from the past? What?
They've only been small. They've only been small.
I'm imagining that, you guys are growing the cane, so then the operations of the mill, are quite separate. Like, you're not also playing in the space that the mill plays in. So it might not be a major question for you. But this conflict in the past, John, can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Oh, it's only been minor issues, that we've dealt with. But I know for one, I'm on a council committee, and some of the people there just go on that committee for their own self-interest, like you've probably been involved with, and it's ridiculous. But our board seems to run pretty well.
Not in local government, John. Never.
No, that's right.
Plenty of people go on council to to pursue their own development proposal. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, well, as I said, the first thing in the law is declaring it. And I mean, the other thing I'd say, there was one issue on the super fund where another director pointed out to me, said, don't you have a conflict there? And I just hadn't considered it. And be aware of other people's perspectives, and you can miss them. And I after they raised it, I said, yeah, okay, and I think you're right. And if someone else does raise it, you probably do have a conflict, or at least a perception of a conflict. So, yeah. But yeah, the law really doesn't deal, I'd certainly in the director's duties, as it talks about conflicts, but the law about in other parts really only just talks about declaring them and then being out of the room if you have declared one. But it's really important to have a think about anything that is to do with your personal, with your life that, could be seen as a conflict of interest. Do you make decisions sometimes that do affect just certain groups of members, or do you have different pricing between the regions, or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
All sealed and above board.
Good to hear.
No, we've got lots of systems in place for payment on quality, and all of the canes transported to the factory at the same rate and all these sorts of things. No, there's never any issues around that.
Yeah, okay, good. Just a few other quick points in the last 5 minutes. We've got impossible to avoid. It can really cause damage, as well as, get into the legal area if you don't handle them well. And they can really destroy any organization, not just a co-op, if it's, if they're not managed well. Defining them is sometimes a challenge, whether this is one definition where the financial or personal interests of a board member or manager are or may appear to be inconsistent with the interests of the co-op. So again, it's about the interests of the co-op versus the interests of the person. Most conflicts arise in transactions with managers, family members of managers, directors, etc. And there's a large variety of them around, only limited by the complexity of modern business. And there's that real spectrum idea. I think that's right. It's not, you shouldn't think yes or no. It's really some up the end. Yes, absolutely. Some down the other end, absolutely not. But there's a whole lot of space in the middle where it's not clear, and where you'll have to make a judgment call about the perceptions. Even if you don't think it's a conflict, can you manage will the members be, be outraged? Will the members think that there's something, something not right? Or doesn't, pass the smell test, or the pub test, or the barbecue test, whatever you want to phrase it. But and on those grounds, it can be better to err on the side of caution, and perhaps make a decision that isn't the best outcome for the co-op, but it is the best outcome overall because you're worried about the perceptions. Okay. There are policies for larger organizations in this, where it's a framework for where you raise them. As I said before, if an employee thought the CEO had a conflict, he's related to some contract to do with the co-op, where do they raise it? What process is in place? Examples of conflicts, and a process to follow if one is identified. So there are policies around in the conflict space. Sometimes those principles and values can be good reference point. If you're struggling with the decision as to whether it's a conflict, you can refer to those. And that's the bookkeeping example. What would you do if the bookkeeping firm was run by Jim's brother? There was a proposal to the board for Jim's brother's bookkeeping firm to do the bookkeeping of the co-op. I mean, you do it all internally, I'm sure. But you know, what is that? What do you think? Is that something you would? Is that a conflict you could manage? I can see. I didn't see Jim's view, but I could see Peter shaking his head.
Actually, our son went to the firm of auditors that were our auditors.
Ah,
He wasn't allowed within a bull's roar of anything to do with business from the sugar milling cooperative.
that sounds appropriate. And auditors and often, you know, have those walls in place internally for those sort of issues. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting. I knew nothing about that, Jim. I promise. It was just a guess. No, it's hard to. I think with bookkeeping, it's hard to imagine. But there's often the flavour in co-ops that, you know, well, supporting a member, supporting internally, supporting a community. Our community can be, you know, part of what a co-op's about. So it can be a difficult question sometimes. I ran this in Brisbane last week, and it was quite interesting. There's a couple of people who were just like, no, we really want to use our own people for our own, you know, to run our own co-op. And they were quite strongly sort of saying, you know, no, that's something we, you know, those sort of conflicts we could manage, and we want to be able to support. So we want to be able to support our own people. So anyway, I just think that was an interesting perspective. I'm not saying anything about Queensland in that comment. Generally, you guys are pretty close to Queensland. Some of you too. It's a lovely place.
About 6 kilometres away it is.
That's right. All right. I'm not going to start the next one, so we've just done 3, but we'll probably mean we'll have 5 in the final session. In my understandings, we're scheduled for 9 o'clock next Monday, so you'll all graduate then. There's no assessment, but hopefully it's been a useful sort of discussion. Again, I'll send you the slides, and the video will go up on your members' website, I think. So I hope that's been a worthwhile 2 hours, and get back to soybean harvesting if you haven't finished, I guess, for some of you. Is that good? Yeah. All right, gents.
All good.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Hopefully that's useful. Have a great day.
Cheers.
Bye.